Welcome back, everyone. If you're here for a good scary story, you're in the right place. Every nightmare begins with something ordinary. A phone call, a text, a stranger, a single moment that doesn't seem important until it's far too late. And tonight, you're about to hear one of those stories. Tonight I'll tell you two stories best heard in the dark. One about a basement ghost breathing through wet earth and whispering names behind the door under the stairs. The other about a silent monk in a chapel who tugs the rope at 4:12. If you hear a whisper, don't answer, don't pull the rope. Lock the door, look over your shoulder one last time, and let's dive into tonight's nightmare. I'm changing the names and a couple of details, mostly because some of the people involved are still alive, and I'd like to keep it that way. But everything else? Yeah, that happened. We bought the house on Hollow Creek Road because it was cheap. That should have been the first red flag. It was one of those big suburban houses that sits a little too far back from the road, with a long driveway, too much yard, and woods pressing in on three sides like they were trying to listen. From the outside, it looked perfect. Fresh siding, new roof, 4 bedrooms, a finished kitchen, a fireplace we never used, and a basement the realtor described as spacious. She didn't say unfinished. She didn't say damp. She didn't say you can hear the pipes knocking at night like somebody walking around under your feet. My dad was thrilled though. He kept saying things like, "This is a steal," and "We're finally getting ahead," and "It's the kind of place you raise a family in." That's the thing about houses. They don't tell you what happened there before you moved in. Not really. They can try to look innocent, but they always keep something. The first weird thing happened on the second night. My younger sister Ellie was 8 at the time. She came into my room around 2 a.m. and stood there in her nightgown, holding her stuffed rabbit by one ear. "There's somebody downstairs," she said. I remember telling her to go back to bed because I was 16 and already annoyed at being woken up. She shook her head and said, "No, not somebody, something." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. Then she said, very quietly, "It knows my name." I stopped laughing after that. The next morning, Dad checked the basement door. It was locked from the inside. He asked if either of us had gone down there. We said no, obviously. He gave us that tired parent look and said the house was settling. Maybe the old lock had jammed. He went down anyway with a flashlight and a crowbar, because that's what dads do when they don't want to admit they're uneasy. He was down there maybe 5 minutes. When he came back up, he didn't say anything at first. He just stood in the kitchen, staring at his own hands. Mom asked him what was wrong, and he said, "There's a smell." "What kind of smell?" He hesitated. "Wet dirt," he said, "and something else." "Like what?" He looked at the basement door and lowered his voice. "Like a dog that's been locked in a car too long." After that, the basement started becoming a problem in little ways. You'd walk down the stairs and feel fine until you hit the 3rd step from the bottom. Then the air changed. It got cold in a way that didn't make sense. Not basement cold, wrong cold. Like the temperature dropped around one spot only. Like the house was breathing out there. The dog refused to go near the laundry room. The breaker kept tripping, but only for the basement lights. At night, we'd hear 3 slow knocks from below, not from the walls, from under the floor. Mom kept saying it was probably a pipe. Dad kept saying it was probably mice. Then Ellie started talking in her sleep. She'd mutter into her pillow, all twisted up and sweating, "Don't make me go down there," or "I didn't take it," or once, clear as day, "It's standing at the bottom of the stairs." That was when my parents started arguing quietly after we went to bed. I heard my mom say, "We should get the house checked," and my dad say, "By who? A priest?" She didn't answer. 2 nights later, something happened that made all of us stop pretending it was normal. I was in the kitchen getting water when I heard Ellie scream. It was the kind of scream that freezes your blood because it doesn't sound like fear. It sounds like pain. I ran toward the stairs. My parents were already there. We found Ellie standing in the upstairs hallway, shaking so hard she could barely keep her balance. She was pointing toward the basement door. "It was in my room," she said. Dad asked who. She started crying so hard she couldn't breathe, but finally she got it out. "The man with no face." Now, I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments where everybody in the room gets quiet at once, but this was one of them. Even my dad, who was usually all logic and tools and skepticism, went pale. He asked her what she meant. Ellie was sobbing so badly she could barely speak, but she said it was standing beside her bed. She woke up because she could smell mud. Then she opened her eyes and saw a shape in the corner. Not a person, not exactly. Tall, thin, too still. And where its face should have been, there was only darkness, like somebody had cut a hole in the air. I remember my mother making a sound I'd never heard before. It was small and sharp, like she'd been punched. Dad went room to room with a baseball bat, checking closets, under beds, behind curtains. Of course he found nothing, but when he came back into Ellie's room, he stopped dead, because something had scratched the paint on the wall beside her bed. 3 lines, long, deep, and fresh. The next morning, Dad called a local contractor we knew from church. The guy came over, walked around the basement, and got weirdly quiet. He kept tapping the concrete with the heel of his boot. Finally, he asked, "Who told you this was a standard foundation?" Dad said, "The realtor." The guy snorted. "That basement wasn't poured over empty ground. There's something under here." He showed us a section of the back wall behind the water heater, where the drywall didn't match the rest. The seams were newer, sloppy even. "It's a sealed-off room," he said. Or it was. Dad asked if he could open it. The contractor looked at him like he was insane. "I wouldn't." Of course Dad did anyway. He ripped the drywall out himself with a crowbar. Behind it was a narrow brick-lined space, maybe 6 feet deep, and barely wide enough for a person to stand in. The floor was packed dirt. The walls were old, blackened brick. There was an iron ring bolted into one wall, and a rusted chain hanging from it. And on the dirt floor, right in the middle, were footprints, bare feet, fresh. My mother made a choking noise and backed into the stairs. Dad held the flashlight steady with one hand, but I could see it shaking. Then Ellie whispered, "He's behind you." We all turned at once. Nothing was there. At least nothing we could see. But the smell hit us so hard we nearly gagged. Wet earth, rot, that awful animal smell again. Then every light in the basement blew out at once. Not flickered, blew. In the dark, we heard something move. Not fast, not hurried, just a slow drag across the concrete, like something was pulling itself toward the stairs. My dad told us to run. We did, and as we came up the basement steps, I heard it behind us. Not footsteps, breathing, deep, wet, right behind my ear. That was the night the real nightmare started. After that, it didn't stay in the basement. It learned the house. It figured out the rooms, the hallways, the sounds we made when we were asleep. It started using them. Ellie would hear Mom calling her from downstairs when Mom was in the shower. Mom would hear me coughing in the laundry room when I was at school. I'd hear Dad walking around the hallway at 3 a.m., but when I got up to check, he'd be dead asleep in bed. Then it started mimicking us better. It got our voices wrong at first, like a bad actor trying to do an impression. Then it got closer, too close. One night I woke up because I heard my own voice outside my bedroom door. "Open up," it whispered. "I'm cold." I didn't move. It said it again, softer this time. "Come on, man, open the door." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely reach for my phone. Then it added, in my dad's voice, "We need to talk about your sister." I didn't sleep after that. Dad finally called a priest, then a therapist, then a plumbing company, then an inspector. The priest wouldn't come inside after stepping into the basement. He stood at the bottom of the stairs for maybe 10 seconds, looked up at the ceiling and said, "There's something unclean here." Then he left. The plumber said the house had an old drainage system, maybe a disused storm channel under the slab. He wouldn't go into the basement after he heard knocking from below, while standing next to the furnace. The inspector claimed there were no code violations, but he also refused to come back when Dad asked him why every mirror in the house had started showing the basement door open, even when it was shut. Yeah, that happened too. You'd look into a mirror in the hallway and see the basement door standing open behind you. Then you'd turn around and it would be closed. Every time. By the end of the month, we were all sleeping in the same room with the doors locked. That's when Ellie started walking in her sleep. She would get up, go downstairs, and stand at the basement door with her hand on the knob. One time we caught her just before she opened it. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't awake. She kept whispering. "He said he's lonely. He said he's been waiting." Mom slapped her across the face to wake her up. Ellie came to screaming. Then she looked at all of us and started crying harder than I'd ever seen anyone cry, because she said she hadn't been dreaming. She said she'd been downstairs. She said the man with no face had shown her a room under the basement, deeper than the room Dad had opened, a place with dirt walls and old bones and something hanging from the ceiling like a nest. Then she told us the worst part. He said we moved into his house. My father tried to laugh after that. I think he was trying to keep us from falling apart, but I saw his hands. They were bleeding from where he dug his nails into his palms. The next day, he went into the basement alone. He was gone 7 minutes. When he came back up, his face looked stripped clean of color, and he was holding something in his fist. A little girl's shoe, red, muddy, rotten at the seams. Ellie started screaming immediately. She said it was hers, but it wasn't. It was too old. The leather had cracked with age. The buckle was rusted through. There was no way that shoe had belonged to her. Dad refused to talk about where he found it. He just took us all, packed the car, and drove us to a motel on the highway. We stayed there 3 nights. On the 3rd night, I woke up to the sound of my sister crying. Not in the room, in the bathroom. I went to check, and the sink was running full blast. Ellie stood in the corner in her pajamas, shaking and staring at the shower curtain. "What is it?" I asked. She pointed with a trembling finger. There was a shape behind the curtain. I yanked it open. Nothing. But on the tile wall behind the shower, written in dripping water, were 3 words: "Come back home." We moved out the next day. My father sold the house for less than half what we paid. The buyers never asked why. Maybe they didn't want to know. Maybe they felt the same thing we did the minute they walked into that basement. A year later, Dad got a call from the new owner. He didn't answer it. It was a voicemail. I heard it myself. A man's voice, shaking and breathless, saying, "You need to come get your daughter. She keeps asking to go downstairs." Then, after a pause, a second voice came on the line. Soft, childlike. It was Ellie, except it wasn't Ellie. It said very clearly, "Dad, "It's not in the basement anymore." Then the line went dead. We never went back to Hollow Creek Road. But sometimes when it rains hard, I still dream about that smell. Wet earth. And something else. Something waiting just beneath the floorboards, patient as a held breath. This one is even harder to explain, because unlike the first story, the thing in this house didn't feel angry. Not at first. It felt deliberate, like it was doing a job. My Aunt Claire inherited Ashgrove Manor from a great-uncle none of us had really met. It was one of those old American estates with the kind of history that gets turned into local ghost tours and half-truths, big stone walls, narrow windows, a chapel wing that hadn't been used in decades, a library with a fireplace so large you could stand in it, miles of creaking hallways and doors that never quite shut right. The place sat on a hill outside of town, surrounded by pine woods and a stone fence that had collapsed in several places, but still looked stubborn, like it had decided not to fully die. The rumors about the house were old. A monk lived there once. That was the part everyone in town seemed to agree on, though no one agreed on the details. Some said he came from Europe. Some said he was a caretaker. Some said he was never officially a monk at all, just a man who took vows after a tragedy and refused to leave. The records were messy. Ashgrove had changed hands too many times, and every family that owned it seemed to have lost something inside those walls. Claire didn't care about any of that. She cared that the house was huge, beautiful, and mostly paid off. She moved in with her son, Ben, and told everyone she was going to turn it into a wedding venue. That lasted about 3 weeks. The first odd thing happened the night they arrived. Claire woke up to the smell of incense, not candle smoke, not dust. Incense, sweet, sharp, and old. She walked downstairs expecting to find a candle burning somewhere, but instead she found the kitchen lights on, and every chair pushed neatly under the table. On the counter was a folded linen cloth she had not put there. Inside it, there were 3 slices of bread, still warm. Ben said maybe the delivery guy had come by late, but there was no order, and no one had been on the property. After that, little things started happening every day. Not dramatic things, not the kind that make you run screaming from a house. Worse than that, small, intimate things. The silverware drawer would be reorganized overnight. All the shoes by the front door would be lined up perfectly, laces tucked in. Dirty dishes would be washed and set to dry in a precise row. If someone left a book face down, it would be turned upright. If a lamp was left on in an empty room, it would be switched off. If a window was open, it would be closed. If a rug was crooked, it would be straightened. And always, always, there was that smell of incense and candle wax, drifting through the halls like someone had just passed by. Claire was annoyed more than scared at first. "I swear to God," she said one morning, standing in the kitchen with her hands on her hips, "if one of you is moving my stuff around, just say it." Ben laughed and said it wasn't him. The housekeeper they hired quit after 2 days. She said she didn't like the man in the robe. Claire thought she was joking. Then the housekeeper refused to enter the East Wing ever again. She left her mop by the door and drove away without waiting for her last paycheck. That's when Claire started seeing him. At first it was only through reflections. A figure in a dark robe at the end of a hallway. A bald head bowed, bare feet, the edge of sleeves moving just out of sight. She thought it was a trespasser. She called the police. They searched the entire property and found nothing. But after they left, Every mirror in the manor was covered in steam, even though none of the bathrooms were in use, and on the largest mirror in the upstairs hall, somebody had written, in a finger dragged through the condensation, "Don't open the chapel." Claire showed that to the cops too. They told her maybe it was a prank. Then they asked if she had teenage boys on the property. After the second week, the monk started appearing openly. Not all the time, just enough. He would stand in the corner of a room while someone was speaking, head lowered, hands folded in his sleeves. If you looked straight at him, he would be gone. If you looked away, he might still be there in the reflection of a window or the polished surface of a table. Ben was the first one brave enough to speak to him, or stupid enough, depending on how you look at it. He found the monk in the library at 1:30 a.m., rearranging chess pieces on the old board by the fireplace, not playing, just moving them into strange patterns, over and over. Ben asked, "What the hell are you doing?" The monk didn't look up. He simply moved the white king to the edge of the board, then placed a black rook in front of it like a barricade. Then he whispered, "Hush." Ben said later that the voice sounded like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. Not loud, not threatening, just old. For a while, the ghost mostly behaved like a very strict house guest. He'd leave doors open that should stay shut, and close doors that should stay open. He would move family photos so no one was standing in the doorway of the chapel wing. He would knock over any vase of lilies brought into the house. He hated roses apparently, because every time Claire brought one into the foyer, he'd find it later in the trash, petals crushed. He also had a strange relationship with the clocks. Every clock in the house would stop at 4:12. If you reset them, they would stop again at 4:12. If you removed the batteries, the hands on the old mantle clock would still creep back to 4:12 by morning. Claire hated that more than anything. "It's some kind of sick joke," she said. But Ben noticed something she didn't. At 4:12 every morning, the monk would appear in the upstairs hall, walk slowly to the chapel wing, and stand with his hand on the door for exactly 1 minute. Then he would leave, never opening it, never looking back. That went on for weeks. The weird part was that the rest of the house felt calmer when he was around. When he wasn't, the air got heavy, the walls seemed to hum, the doors began opening on their own. Claire started hearing footsteps in the attic above her bedroom, but only when the monk was absent. That was when she decided to do what she should have done in the first place: research. She found old county records, church archives, and one yellowed newspaper article from the late 1800s about a fire at Ashgrove. There had been a small religious retreat on the property before it became a private manor. A monk named Brother Silas had served there. He was described as quiet, devout, and unusually devoted to matters of keeping. That phrase jumped out at Claire. The article also mentioned that after the fire, Silas was never officially accounted for. No body, no grave, no confession, just missing. Then, in a handwritten letter tucked into an old deed folder, Claire found something worse. The note said, in shaky ink, "He stays so the bell will not ring." She didn't understand it until the night Ben opened the chapel. He said he was only doing it because he was tired of being told not to. Teenager logic, perfectly awful. He forced the door while Claire was upstairs and heard a sound from the chapel she later described as a sigh under the floor. When she got there, Ben was standing in the doorway with the light on and his face drained of color. The chapel was empty except for dust, a broken altar, and a bell rope hanging down from the ceiling. The bell rope should have gone to nothing. There was no bell visible anywhere. but it was moving, as if something below it had just touched it from beneath the floorboards. The monk appeared behind Claire so suddenly she almost screamed. He was not angry, he was terrified. For the first time since moving in, she saw emotion on his face. He pointed at the floor. Then, with a voice like dry leaves over stone, he said, "Put it back." Ben, being Ben, asked, "Put what back?" The monk took one step into the chapel. Then he stopped cold, like an invisible line had hit him in the chest. His eyes went to the center of the room. Claire looked there too. At first, she saw nothing. Then she realized there was a seam in the floorboards, a panel, freshly disturbed. Ben had opened it without realizing it, and from under that panel came a sound I still have trouble describing. Not a growl, not a voice, more like breathing through teeth. The monk shut his eyes. Then he did something I'll never forget. He knelt, right there on the chapel floor, with whatever was under the boards waking up. He lowered his head and started praying so fast the words blurred together. Claire dragged Ben out of the room and slammed the door. They called a contractor the next morning. The contractor found a hidden space beneath the chapel. Not a basement, not exactly. A sealed chamber. Inside it were old restraints, fragments of rosary beads, candle wax built up in layers, and dozens of marks scratched into the stone walls. Tall marks, short marks. Some of them looked like tally lines. Some of them looked like fingernails. The contractor refused to go back in. After the second ladder descent, he came out white as paper and told Claire, "You need to leave that room alone." Naturally, she didn't, because people never do. She had the floor opened wider. Inside the chamber, they found a second bell, small, rusted, hanging from a beam, and beneath it, in the dust, footprints, bare feet, a lot of them, all circling the center of the room. That night, the monk did something he had never done before. He spoke directly to Claire. She found him in the dining room, standing beside the long table she had set for a staging appointment the next morning. Every chair had been straightened, every plate had been centered, every fork aligned. He looked at her and said very softly, "He likes when you make room." Claire told me later that she understood then, instantly and without explanation, that the monk had not been haunting the house for the sake of haunting it. He had been maintaining it, guarding it, cleaning it, moving things not because he was confused, but because he was preparing the house to keep something contained, something below the chapel, something that wanted the bell. After that, Claire stopped treating the monk like a nuisance. She started listening. If he moved a chair, she left it there. If he closed the door, nobody opened it. If he put a hand on the chapel wall and shook his head, they did not ask questions. And for a little while, that worked. The house settled. The breathing under the chapel stopped. The clock still froze at 4:12, but nobody minded. Then one afternoon, a contractor hired by Claire's decorator removed an old wooden panel in the east wing to restore architectural character. The monk appeared in the doorway the second the nail came out. He didn't touch anyone. He didn't even raise his voice. He just said, "No." The contractor laughed. That was a mistake. Every light in the manor went out. Something heavy moved inside the walls, and from somewhere under the floor came the sound of a bell striking once, just once. The contractor dropped the panel and ran. Claire tried to hold the east wing shut after that, but it was too late. The house had already changed. The monk began spending more time in the chapel, kneeling for hours at a time. When he did walk the halls, he moved fast, almost frantic, like a man running out of time. He started leaving salt lines at doorways. He extinguished candles before midnight. He took mirrors off the walls and laid them face down. Then, on the last night anyone ever slept in Ashgrove Manor, Claire woke up to find the dining room set for 8. There were only 3 of us in the house. She counted the plates twice. 8 settings, 8 glasses, 8 napkins folded into sharp triangles, and at the head of the table sat the monk, motionless, with his hands folded. For the first time, he looked directly at her and said, "Now it knows your number." Claire grabbed Ben and ran. They didn't stop until they reached town. Police checked the manor in the morning and found nothing unusual except that every door in the house was open. Every single one. Except the chapel. That door was shut tight. Inside, according to the officer who finally forced it open, the altar had been moved against the far wall, and the floorboards in the center of the room had been nailed down from the outside. Not from the inside, from the outside, which makes no sense unless you think about it too long. Claire sold Ashgrove Manor 6 months later, at a massive loss. The new owners never lasted the year. I know that because one of them called Claire, asking whether the priest in the robe was part of the charm package. She hung up on him. As for the monk, no one has seen him since the house was emptied. But every so often, Claire says she still wakes at 4:12 a.m. and smells incense in rooms that have been closed for years. And once, just once, she got a message from the new owners. It was a photo of the dining room, 8 places set, 9 chairs pulled up, and in the reflection of the dark window behind the table, a monk in a brown robe standing just out of reach, not facing the room, facing the front door, like he was waiting for something to come in.